Hello, welcome to The Moment episode 6. This time I have two stories. I'll be talking about a report from think tank Policy North, which discusses how to get the young people into employment in order to make the north of England more of a commercial centre come the time of Brexit. And I'll also be following up on the campaign group Save Rothbury Cottage Hospital with an interview I did with one of its members. But right now let's turn to the first story. Policy North, a cross-party think tank, has put out a report written in part by Jeremy Middleton, who's a local entrepreneur in the northeast. And this report talks about growing the North's economy in order to make it a large player in post-Brexit Britain. The report's first point is about the divergence in support for Brexit in small towns compared to cities in the northeast. They say, quote, almost all of the areas that voted Remain were clustered around metropolitan university towns and cities, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and Newcastle. Manchester voted 60% to Remain, yet right across the northwest, northeast and Yorkshire and Humber, it was just one of 11 areas to vote Remain out of 125. The link they provide to the Electoral Commission results on the Brexit referendum bear this out, and just for context, the 11 areas are Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Sefton, South Lakeland, Stockport, Trafford, Wirral, Harrogate and York. Though it is worth noting that Lancaster, which is also a university town, voted Leave with 37,309 votes to Remain's 35,732 votes, so it seems that York and Lancaster are still at it. The report goes on to talk about education strategies as a way of helping the North become an area of importance in commerce. The report puts emphasis on work experience. They say, quote, we recommend an introduction of a new skills standard. Schools would encourage all young people from the age of 11 to work through a clear programme of careers advice, training, mentoring and work experience to earn accreditation as being work-ready. And they go on to say that the programme would fit around their academic studies and would, quote, not only give confidence to employers that workplace skills were being addressed, but it would also instill in young people a culture of lifelong skills development. So, essentially, it's going to be a more robust work experience programme that, instead of giving pupils a very weak experience of mostly office work, it would be far more focused on making sure that they've actually got employable skills by the end of it. So in a way it's quite similar to how in university there's a whole range of careers advice and placement opportunities, except that it would be offered from a much earlier age. They also make the point that recent research suggests, quote, just 15% of 19 to 24-year-olds say they've engaged with employers on 3 or more occasions. Now, this is in relation to pupil interaction with the world of business. And the citation for this takes you to the abstract of an academic article from 2013 written by Anthony Mann and Christian Percy. Now, this abstract reads, quote, a 2011 survey associates wage returns and school-mediated employer contacts for 169 full-time 19 to 24-year-old workers on annual salaries and suggests a link of 4.5% between each additional school-mediated employer contact, such that 4 employer contacts would produce results in line with the US studies. The US studies that they're talking about here found that there's a potential wage uplift of 6.5 to 25% through mediated employer contacts. Mann and Percy then say, quote, contrasting US and UK studies suggests that any causal link from school-mediated employer contact to wage outcomes is likely to be driven more by increased social capital, which is improved access to trustworthy information and social network development, than by development of either technical or employability skills. So interestingly, this point rather contradicts the Policy North report's assertion that a programme focused on just that, employability, would help students get into employment, although that was of course more in relation to school-age children, whereas the Mann and Percy article was relating to 19 to 24-year-olds. But that's still quite an interesting point to note, that it's more likely to be the students' access to information and social network ability that determines their wage outcomes, rather than by the schools mediating between them and employers. And yet the Policy North report seems to be opining that such programs would actually be beneficial for getting the young people into employment. If their source here is to be believed, it would actually be better for schools to focus on making sure that their students actually have access to up-to-date information on employment opportunities, rather than by mandating programs on employability. So there's a lot of information in this document, and I'll leave a link to it in the description so you can read it for yourself and determine whether or not you think the ideas they put forward would actually work. Okay, so now it's time to move on to the second and final story. Last episode I talked about the group Save Rothbury Cottage Hospital and their bid to keep that hospital open. This time I have an interview with David Blakeburn, one of the group's members, and I started off by asking him how the citizens group came about.
Well, the Clinical Commissioning Group for Northumbria Healthcare Trust put a working party together last August 2016, to look at the demands that are being made of them on savings, and sort of preemptively just said, all right, well, we'll shut Rothbury Community Hospital beds, the 12 inpatient beds, and we'll save £500,000. And they closed them on the 3rd of September 2016, so only sort of a matter of 10 days after they convened their working party. Now, they're allowed to do that if it's a temporary closure, so that's what they called it. And the first we knew of it in the community was virtually the day before. So a few like-minded people got together under our coordinator, Katie Scott. Then we sort of gathered the group together with mostly retired healthcare professionals, actually. Not that I'm one. And it kind of started there, and then gathered some momentum as we understood what was going on. So then they went into formal consultation in January of this year, because you can't just temporarily close a ward and then plan to close it without public consultation. The consultation itself is flawed, because there's only one option as far as they're concerned, which is the permanent closure of the beds. So that's why we've put together our vision for Coquetdale community care, including returning the 12 inpatient beds.
I then asked whether the CCG had actually given any other reason for the closure, or if it was purely based on cost saving.
Well, to begin with, that was the reason that the CCG gave. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the construction of healthcare through the NHS. Yeah, you've got the Northumbria Healthcare Trust, which is kind of the umbrella organisation, but it's the Clinical Commissioning Group, CCG, under Dr. Alistair Blair, who was a GP in Morpeth. It's the CCG that makes all the money decisions. Now, they have a board and they have lay members on the board and all the rest of it, like Janet Guy, but they are under, to be fair to all CCGs right across the country, they're really under the cosh as far as expenditure is concerned. But it looked as if they were just picking off an easy target, because Rothbury Community Hospital, the bed occupancy was low. It was at around about 60%. On average over the year up to the closure, and so they must have thought to themselves, or we know they thought to themselves, well, this is underused, so let's close it. And they worked out somehow, I think on the back of a fag packet, that it would save £500,000. And it doesn't. people still get ill, and they just have to go somewhere else.
I had noted in the Save Rothbury Cottage Hospital document, which I talked about last time, that they'd said that they had agreed with some elements of the CCG's plan, and I asked David to elaborate on that.
Well, we agree that something different has to happen in terms of the building. Now, the building is underutilised. There's no doubt about that, because it had always been a plan at some point that the GP surgery in Rothbury would move there. Now, the CCG have come up with what they call a health and well-being centre, although in their consultation document, have you seen that?
Yeah, I did have a look through that.
In their consultation document, they haven't quantified what a health and well-being centre is. It's just sort of a
nebulous term,
a kind of bland description of nice things that might go on in the building. Now, the trouble with the building, of course, it was paid for under PFI, and there's still 15 years to go on that PFI contract, and the rent is around about $600,000 a year. So you're going to be paying out, and it goes up with rent reviews. So you're going to be paying out between 9 and 10 million over the next 15 years. So it really needs to be used. Now, the GP surgery is going to move there, right? And that probably next year, because the building they're in at the moment in the centre of Rothbury isn't really fit for purpose. So the ground floor is fantastic. You know, you can run your clinics there, you can have your GP surgery, you can have your physiotherapy suite. We get visiting clinics, you know, like retinopathy photography and all that kind of stuff. And then the top floor, which is the 12 inpatient beds, which are all in single rooms with ensuite, nothing will happen up there, because all of the facilities in the health and wellbeing centre, in inverted commas, will be on the ground floor. So the best option for locations like this and communities like this would be what they call step down, because if you can't get home care, and it's very difficult to do that, the only option is for them to stay in hospital, and therefore their bed block.
Yeah.
But if you've got a step down facility where you don't need high levels of clinical care, so you don't have to have a doctor on site all the time, although there'll be a GP there in the future. You can bring people back into Rothbury for post-operative care. You can have one sister, a couple of nurses, some healthcare assistants across the 12 inpatient beds, and then you release the beds at the acute hospitals like NSEC and Wansbeck, and people get great care before they go home.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of found it quite funny when they were sort of talking about the hospital in Cramlington as if that was an alternative, and you think, well, that's 24 miles away from Rothbury. You know, they don't seem to have thought about the geographical element of this.
Well, one of the things they've failed, as you probably saw in our document, is a list of things that they've failed to do. So they failed to carry out a transport survey, and they failed to carry out an equality impact assessment. And equality impact assessments cover things like gender, race, sexuality, and all the rest of it, but also age.
Yeah.
And the ageing population of Upper Coquetdale will get to a critical point at some point. I mean, you've got to understand. Sorry, I'm ranting now, but the difficulty with areas like this is the kids don't stay, right? You know, they'll go to school and they'll go to university and they don't come back.
Yeah.
And you've also got a lot of people moving to North Northumberland in retirement. So the age profile is just going to go up and up and up. People are living longer, and a different type of care model has to take account of that. Otherwise, we're not the society that we would like to think we are. But you're right about the geography. And also NSEC, the one at Cramlington, that is acute emergency only.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's your A&E for everywhere in Northumbria. Wansbeck used to have an A&E, but now that's the higher level clinical stuff and the cancer and clinics and all that kind of gear. and it's a long way away. And if people are stuck in one spec, or even North Tyneside General, then it's very difficult for friends, family, particularly family, to go and visit them.
David then moved on to quite an interesting point about the potential decisions of the people behind the CCG's plan.
We have accused the NHS, and particularly Dr. Blair and Stephen Young, of a kind of ideological decision.
Right.
You know, the NHS model that we have at the moment through NHS England and Simon Stevens, who's head of NHS England, is that medicine should be delivered in massive hubs, right, where all of the expertise is concentrated. Now, fine, that's okay in a city.
Yeah.
But when you get into rural communities, it's a little more difficult. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. Now, I can understand why the CCG would look at Rothbury and go, right, well, that's an easy target. Low bed occupancy. We can probably save some money, not £500,000 a year, I'll tell you that. So I can understand how it came about. But Dr. Blair and Stephen Young have got to realise that it isn't as simple as that. And that's what the campaign has been about, to try and prove this. But Blair and Young are just absolutely sticking to their guns like it is ideological rather than sensible. At the same time, you've got NHS England, Simon Stevens again, coming out with some new rules over bed closures. And they were announced in March, right in the middle of the consultation, which basically said, unless there are plans that work that are in place, you cannot close beds.
Right.
Now, because the consultation went out before this new Rule 5 came out, then the CCG think they can just carry on.
So, plenty of things to think about there, especially with regards to the fact that the closure of the beds wouldn't create the kind of savings that the CCG were hoping for, and yet, like David said, they're still pursuing it regardless. But this is definitely going to be one of those stories that I may have to come back to, because it'll definitely be interesting to see where it ends up, and whether the campaign can actually achieve what it set out to do. And that's all for this episode. Join me in a fortnight's time, where I'll be bringing you more stories from around Northumberland and Newcastle. Until then, I'm Oliver Ralph, and this is The Moment.